I just want to give a quick disclaimer saying that everything in this video is mine and Tog's opinion. It is not meant to offend anyone either. We're just trying to give some constructive criticism to help with the teams in Shaymin Division, whether it's just a few small changes that they need or that we think they might need a couple big changes. We didn't intend this to make anyone upset or mad. It's just trying to help. So please don't take it that way, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Power Rankings for VDL Season 3 for the Shaymin Division. We're going to go through and rank the teams that were drafted in the Shaymin Division based on a few different factors. Some of the different things that we are looking for today on these teams are going to be whether they have good cores like a Fairy Dragon Steel and a Firewater Grass core, if they have knockoff users, grounded poison types to remove toxic spikes, do they have good hazard setters, do they have good hazard removal, and a few other things. Today I have my good friend Tog with me. You want to say hi?
Hello. How's it going?
He's going to be going through and helping me decide where all of these teams should be placed, and now I kind of want to talk about the actual tiers and what they mean. The top tier we have Great Team, which we consider to be no or very small changes that need to be made, and overall there's a lot of synergy in the team, and everything that we are looking for was checked off. Next up, we have minor changes. This is just for a few, one or two small flaws we see in the team. Example of like no bulky water type or just some small gaps in the speed tier would put them in the minor changes category. Next up, we have multiple changes. This is when we see quite a few things missing in the team, maybe some hazard control lacking or no grounded poison type, and maybe some bigger speed gaps that need to be covered. Next up, we have revisions recommended. This is where we don't see some good immunities like ground immunities or electric immunities, as well as really lacking in the hazard department or having some very slow Pokemon, maybe nothing that crosses over the base 110 mark, as well as multiple weaknesses to different types. And the final tier we have is Team Overhaul Needed. This is where we really recommend that you just use your transactions to get new members for your team because it lacks synergy and you're missing multiple cores or several different things that we think are important, and maybe have some just very repetitive speed tiers or just flat out missing speed tiers. Alright, first we have Arian of the Kyoto Koraidons. Their team consists of Kyurem, Spectrier, Metagross, Toxapex, Mandibuzz, Gliscor, Cryogonal, Clefairy, Knackley, or is that Knacklestack? That's Knacklestack. Noivern, and Electivire. Now, when I look at this team, it has actually some decent speed tiers. There's a little bit of a gap between Noivern and Cryogonal, but it's not the worst thing in the world.
Biggest issue for me is that the only fairy is Clefairy.
Yeah, that does hinder this team quite a bit because like the Fairy Dragon Steel core just isn't as up to par as it maybe should be.
Yeah, the other two are great for the core, but yeah, Clefairy is just not cutting it, in my eyes.
The speed tiers also get really kind of weird in the middle. After the Cryogonal at 105, we see 3 base 95s repeating, and then we see an 80, a 70, and then 3 35s. So it gets kind of repetitive in there, which isn't the best because that 35 to 70 is quite a decent gap.
That's, yeah, definitely another big issue.
Noivern also feels a little repetitive on top of Kyurem. They are both very strong special attackers. Noivern does get defog, which is one benefit, but they both fill a very similar role that I think maybe like a fire type, which this team is missing, could cover, because there's not a grass type either. Like the fire water grass core just doesn't exist on this team.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, you got your Kyurem as your drag, and you got your Mandibuzz for flying and defog, and Spectre you got for your speed.
Yeah, so Noivern's just not really the best here. And it does take up the Terra Captain, too, on this team, which I don't think really it wants. I think Knackley would have appreciated, or Knacklestack would appreciate that a lot more, especially like Terra Water is such a good Terra type for it. So with all that, we are putting it up in B tier. We think a few slight changes, like multiple changes could be made, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Just, you get rid of that Noivern, you replace it with maybe a fire type, or a grass type, just dependent. It's just the team has 3 flying types, so the ice weakness is just ridiculous.
Yeah, for sure. Next we got 2 Bloober, who we have Zamazenta Crowned, Hydrapple, Tyranitar, Cinderace, Cloyster, Hisuian Electrode, Swampert, Doxbun, Vileplume, Glastrier, and Espeon.
This team has a lot of weaknesses, a lot of repetitive weaknesses. 2 of those being ground and fighting. This team is really weak to, with not the best resists. Fighting is all right. I wouldn't really count Espeon as the best resist, but there is Vileplume and Doxbun. But on the ground side of it, there's absolutely nothing that resists besides Hydrapple. No flying type makes it rough. Electrode is the Terra captain for this team with Terra flying, but I don't really think you want to waste your Terra for a defensive, like, an immunity.
Yeah, okay. You also have no ghost type, so no ghost and no flying type. Having one of each would help both weaknesses significantly.
Even something like Drifloon, like, that shares a type, isn't the best Pokemon, would at least help cover, you know, because fighting and ground are super common types. Earthquake is everywhere.
Yeah, being ground weak is never a good thing.
The hazard removal is also not the best. They have Cinderace that can court change, and they also have Espeon with Magic Bounce, but those don't, like, remove. I mean, Cinderace does, but if there's hazards on the other side, it's, you know, you're not really getting far. So the only true, like, removal is Cloyster with Rapid Spin, which doesn't want to always be doing that either. So it's not bad, it's just, like, I think this team would have appreciated maybe a Defogger.
I don't think Cloyster even gets Rapid Spin this gen.
I think it does. I would be shocked if it didn't.
I think I looked this up before, and yeah, it does not get Rapid Spin.
Oh my goodness. So the doc is lying to us. On the graphic you see on screen, it says it gets Rapid Spin. It does not. So this team is just put with Cinderace and Espeon. That's a little bit rough.
Alright, so you definitely you want an actual remover somewhere.
Yeah.
Which I know is hard, because it's kind of few and far between this generation, but having one would be very beneficial.
I agree. And I think the final note with this team is there's just not really, like, too much synergy between the members. They all are just, like, kind of independent. Like, you have T-Tar that sets sand, but nothing that abuses sand, like, at all. I think even, like, a Houndstone this team would like, because at least it gives you a ghost type, and then you have something that abuses sand. There's not even another rock type to get the Spidef boost. Like, it's just chipping down the members of your own team. So we're going to be putting this team up into revisions recommended. We think that with some more hazard removal and maybe a bit of synergy between the members of this team, we can see this being a very scary team, because Zamazenta is just a huge threat. It's so powerful, but it just isn't have the best support for it.
Yeah, if you get Tyrant proper support or sand abusers, that will definitely bump that team up a good bit.
Next up, we have Britt Bellina, who is rocking a snow team with Baxcalibur, Alolan Ninetales, Galarian Slowking, Skeledirge, Ogerpon Wellspring, Tinkaton, Volibee, Granbull, Piloswine, Grumpig, and Cincino.
Now, I think important to note that Ripolina did kind of sub in for somebody like halfway through the draft, which we are putting that into consideration here.
Yeah, the first 4 members were already drafted, so up until Skeledirge, which that is an amazing core to have. You have Alolan Ninetales, which sets Hail, Baxcalibur, who abuses it, and then Galarian Slowking is also a backup setter with Chilly Reception, which Baxcalibur and Veil and Snow and everything is just a menace. This team does have quite a big steel weakness with 5 members, I believe, being weak to steel. Maybe 4, I think. Yeah, 4.
When you got several resists, and steel's not the most common offensive type, so you can work around it, but it's definitely so important to know. For like Bullet Punch and Iron Heads are going to be tough to deal with.
The one thing that holds this team back the most is its repetitive typings. You have 2 ice types, which makes sense because of, you know, it's a hail team or a snow team. But 3 fairy types does make this team struggle a little bit, as well as it doesn't have the best hazard removal. Volibee is there, and it's not the worst, and you do have Tidy Up Cincinno, but when you have a team that's so weak to Stealth Rocks, I think you want a little bit more removal as an option.
For sure.
Overall, though, very cute team. We're putting it up into multiple changes just because of those weaknesses that they have, as well as the lack of hazard removal.
Alright, next up we have Curved Cranium, who has Glamora, Clefable, Regieleki, Incineroar, Minior, Hitmontop, Alola, Skarmory, Toxtricity, Sinistcha, and Rhyperior.
This team has a lot of weaknesses to it. The first thing that we noticed is there's 3 rock types on this team. Now, there's nothing wrong with rock types, but in my opinion, it is the least useful type to draft because it doesn't give you too much of a defensive profile. And this team has 3 of them. In Minior, Rhyperior, and Glamora, I think Glamora and Minior do separate enough things to where they're fine. I see the issue in being Rhyperior. It is just doing something that's already been done by a couple other Pokemon.
It's like, I will say, I know it gives you your ground, but like, you do not want to, you do not want a third rock type. You want, that's your only ground, is the only reason it's there.
The second thing holding this team back tremendously is the speed tiers. Regieleki being the fastest Pokemon in the game is fantastic. It hits 200 base speed. We love that. but after that, it falls off to Glamora at 86 base speed. The only exception to this is Minior. If it is under half health, will have its shield down ability activate, and it will go up to 120 base speed. But that is such a, I don't want to say niche situation, but it's not guaranteed, so it holds back this team just so much.
Yeah.
Regieleki being the fastest thing, you would think it would want to put on a lot of offensive pressure with its electric type moves, but it also lacks the support to be able to do that, to remove ground types. Although Lamola is not a bad water type by any means, but it isn't the best at removing opposing Pokemon. It's there to take hits. Sinistra can remove ground types. I haven't used it personally, so I don't know too much about it, but I think that is one thing holding the team back quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, this team is really weak, also weak to ground and water, and to a lesser extent, also ice and electric. It's pretty weak to 4 types overall.
I think a dragon type would improve this team quite a bit to help with that Fairy Dragon Steel Core, because Clefable and Skarmory are absolute demons, and this team has so much hazard potential in setting them up and removing them. There's so much potential with this team. It's just lacking something that's going to hit hard and break. You have Minior that can set up, but again, it's not the most reliable. Outside of that, the team just doesn't hit as hard as I think it would want to.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, we are going to be putting it in the overhaul needed. It's not horrible. Like, there is still some upsides to this team with the hazard setters and removers. I just think there's nothing to take advantage of all of those hazards that are going to be set up. Feel free to prove us wrong, though. Absolutely.
Yeah, feel free to prove us wrong. I think, yeah, the two biggest things you could do is get a dragon and get a different ground beside Rhyperior. I think this team would improve tremendously.
Next up, we have Flupkey, who is rocking Chempao, Iron Treads, Hisuian Zoroark, Thundurus Therian, Regidraco, Galarian Weezing, Slowking, Chestnut, Flareon, Beartick, and Probopass. Hisuian Zoroark synergizes super well with this team because there are so many fighting weaknesses in Chempao, Iron Treads, Beartick, and Probopass. It can play so many mind games. I love it.
Yeah, Hisuian Zoroark just definitely synergizes super well with the fighting weaknesses, and I love that.
I think a base 90 speed Pokemon is like the one thing missing, because there's a slight gap in between Thundurus and Regidraco. There is also a slight gap between Zoroark and Chempao, but I don't find that one to be too bad because of Chempao's speed tier being so fast, and it does get good priority as well in Ice Shard. Another thing is I think there could be a better Stealth Rocker. Don't get me wrong, Iron Treads is fantastic, but it being the only reliable one might cause a little bit of issues in team building. Probopass is there, but I don't see Probopass coming more than once in the entire season. It's just not a Pokemon that comes.
Especially not being a Terra Captain, it's, not going to come a lot.
Outside of that, though, I think this team is put together very well. Their Fairy Dragon Steel Core is very good. Same with their Fire, Water, Grass. It's not as good, but Flareon is a huge threat if you let it set up a Trailblaze in this generation. And Chestnut can eat up some decent hits with its bulletproof ability.
Yeah, for sure. Great team overall.
Yeah, so this team is going up into minor changes. There's not too much that we would do to change this team besides, like I said, maybe getting a base 90 Pokemon that can set some Stealth Rocks.
Next up, we have Kyle, who has Iron Bundle, Iron Moth, Garchomp, Hisuian Samurott, Corviknight, Gardevoir, Colossal, Pincurchin, Sceptile, Primeape, and Spite-Ops.
This team synergizes super well with the electric terrain set by Pincurchin. Iron Bundle and Iron Moth take such good advantage of that electric terrain set by Pincurchin, as well as Sceptile with the Unburden ability, which is also a Terra Captain for this team with Terra Flying for acrobatics. All of that synergizes super well.
That's some incredible synergy we got here.
Has some of the best hazard setters, and Hisuian Samurott being the best spike setter. Garchomp gets both Stealth Rocks and spikes, and then Spite-Ops also sets sticky webs. Not that this team really had a problem with its speed.
I think, probably my two biggest complaints, and these are very minor ones, are the lack of a true bulky water, which you have a Hisuian Samurott that can take a hit or two, but
it's no Milotic or Suicune.
Yeah, exactly. And then Gardevoir as well being your fairy, which Gardevoir's not a bad buy, but again, it's not going to take a lot of hits like you would ideally like a fairy to do. Those are probably my two biggest complaints of this team, but overall,
yeah, I think overall fantastic. I mean, with the points that were given, I think this team was drafted beautifully. So this is actually going to be our first great team. Those changes that Tog recommended are so minor that we think this team really does not need any changes and will perform very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait to see the team perform.
Next up is Legend Lamarcus, rocking Latios, Weavile, Rotomwash, Serena, Okidogi, Florges, Spiritomb, Noctowl, Heatran, Galarian Articuno, and Quagsire. Quagsire is a very good hazard setter, gets both Stealth Rocks and Spikes, and then Heatran also gets Stealth Rocks, but I think outside of that, Quagsire doesn't want to be locked into running hazards every single week, which is kind of what its role seems to be in this team, and I think getting one more hazard setter would benefit this team, but it's not necessary by any means.
I mean, you also got Heatran for rocks, but like it's not going to want to be doing it every single week.
Yeah, sometimes Heatran wants to run, offensive sets, like Choice Scarf, Choice Specs. So, again, not the end of the world, just something we noticed. The speed tiers get a little bit stagnant. We have Rotom, who hits 86, Okidogi, who hits 80, Heatran, who hits 77, Florges 75, Serena 72, and Noctowl at 70. There's a big portion of this team that has very close speed tiers, which I think could be fleshed out a bit more.
Get rid of that clutter there. For sure. That'll be amazing.
Outside of that, I think maybe a little bit better hazard removal as well. Serena's a great rapid spinner, but Noctowl being the only defogger is a little But with all of that, I think this is an A-tier team. We did point out a lot of things that could be changed, but they're all very minor changes that they have general answers to. It's like, oh, maybe another Stealth Rock setter. Oh, maybe another hazard removal. But they have those things, so it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. They can definitely work as is, no problem.
Absolutely, yeah. So minor changes for this team.
Then next we have Lord Arcanum, who has Dragapult, Iron Crown, Galarian Zapdos, Sneasler, Sylveon, Armarouge, Donphan, Indeedee, Shiftry, Rampardos, and Charjabug.
We almost put this team as like no changes needing to be made because it has some amazing synergy. It does lack a spike setter, but with everything else, I don't think it's the end of the world. Has some good hazard clearing in Donphan as well as Shiftry with Defog. But where we figured out this team had one huge issue was its lack of a bulky water type, let alone a water type at all.
There's no water type whatsoever, which that alone we could not in good faith put this in no changes without a water type.
I don't know if it's still left, but I think the ultimate change this team could use is you pick up Gastrodon and it's totally fixed, because that gives you a spike setter as well as another stealth rock setter, and then it gives you that bulky water type.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you swap Gastrodon, it's instant S.
But the synergy between Indeedee, Iron Crown, Sneasler, and Armarouge just was unmatched, which is why we have to put this team up in minor changes. It's just that core is amazing.
Yeah, that's a terrifying core. Yeah, definitely. If you just pick up a water type, doesn't even have to be bulky, there's a good chance you can bump it up to no changes.
Yeah, especially in place of Rampardos, because no shots at Rampardos here, but I don't think it does the most for this team.
I mean, it's a Terra Captain, which is cool. I hope to see it do well, because I love Rampardos as a Pokemon, but yeah, it's just...
a water type would be better. Next up, we have Plays for Days, who drafted Scizor, Volcanion, Diancie, Overquill, Lycanroc Dusk, Arboliva, Meloetta, Annihilate, Inteleon, Kilowattrel, and Sandaconda. The speed tiers on this team are not too bad. It does go from base 110 in Lycanroc to base 90 in Meloetta and in Annihilate, so I think a base 100 would fit like perfectly in there, especially since base 100 is a very common speed tier. But outside of that, isn't too bad at all.
I will say there's another decent issue in that there's no dragon type, and it's also kind of ground weak. Like I know you have your Kilowattrel and Arboliva that eat ground hits, and Graphic Train even for Arboliva, but you got how many ground weaknesses? You got 1, 2, 3. I'm seeing 4 ground weaknesses.
Yeah, Arboliva can set Seed Sour, which will resist Earthquake, but there are other moves to get around that, like High Horsepower or Stomping Tantrum. Biggest issue, though, overall with this team is it just lacks synergy. All of these Pokemon do very well separately, but together, there's just nothing forming. You're trying to force them together, and I don't see a like synergetic result.
Right.
And the last thing is that the only form of hazard removal this team has is Defog on Scizor, which I think can hurt this team if there's like spike stacking or something like that. And Scizor doesn't want to be locked into running defog every single week, so I think getting another hazard removal will benefit this team a lot. So we're going to put it up into multiple changes just because lack of a dragon type and good removal really is going to hinder this team quite a bit.
All right, next we have Shadow Knight, who has Gouging Fire, Venusaur, Hamo-Oh, Hisuian Quillfish, Grimmsnarl, Rotom Heat, Mismagius, Bastiodon, Rammelghast, Feraligatr, and Vikavolt.
This is a Sun team without a Sun setter. Gouging Fire loves Sun. Venusaur loves Sun even more. But what do we not see? A Drought setter. I believe Torkoal, and if not Torkoal, Ninetales, and if not Ninetales, Vulpix are all still on the board. And I think if you're going to have another fire type in Rotom Heat, you might as well make that be a Sun setter, since you already have Vikavolt as an electric type, which is a really good electric type as well, since it gets sticky webs.
Yeah, and then also there's another thing that confused us, that Bastiodon being its primary Terra type being Rock instead of Steel.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Bastiodon is the only Steel type on this team, which is another conversation we could have. But each Terra Captain has to use one of its own stab types, and Bastiodon chose Rock over Steel, which was just an interesting choice because I think Steel is just 1000% like always the choice. But I get it that maybe it was just an oversight because of the other two types you're going to be probably clicking more, which I believe are like, what, Fighting and Water, I think were the two types that were chosen.
Fighting and Flying.
Gotcha. We also had a question about Mismagius's Terra as well. Stellar is not bad by any means. I just think Fairy might have fit it a little bit better.
I mean, yeah, Mismagius has enough coverage where it can make decent use of Stellar, but yeah, I think something like Fairy, we both agreed that something like Fairy would just be overall more beneficial for it.
Absolutely. I think the final two things is the speed tiers are stagnant. We have 4 Pokemon in the base 80 range with one hitting 78 right after, so very repetitive, and Mismagius being the fastest thing at base 105 pushes this team down very low. And the final thing being a lack of good hazard removal. Brambleghast is not bad by any means, but when you have 3 Pokemon on your team weak to Stealth Rocks, I think you want a better form of removal. So we're putting this up into revisions recommended, with the speed being very stagnant, not having a good or any Sun setter, and a lack of rapid spinning. I think this team could use some work. Next up we have Truckjud, who has Great Tusk, Meowscarada, Goldengo, Primarina, Talonflame, Toucanon, Crocalor, Galvantula, Mesprit, Dragalge, and Comfey. I look at this team and I honestly question how it's legal. Like, how did it hit the point regiment? It's absolutely insane.
That is a crazy team, yeah.
The only real weird thing, like slight change that we felt this team might need, was Dragalge being a Terra Captain feels a little weird considering it's the only Dragon type for this team. I think Crocalor would have appreciated being a Terra Captain a lot more. That thing with Terra Water is just absolutely insane. But I don't think this is the end of the world by any means at all.
Yeah, for sure. And Terra Comfey, I've seen myself, it can put in some amazing work. I love Terra Comfey.
This team has some great hazard setters. Great Tusk sets up Stealth Rocks easily. Meowscarada gets spikes as well as T-spikes. And then some great removal with the aforementioned Great Tusk being the best rapid spinner in the game. And then Talonflame also still gets defog. So this team has a lot of different options for that. Great speed tiers as well. Near the end, it starts to drop off a little bit, but that's when the speed tiers aren't as important. So we're not going to take too much of that into account. So we're putting this one up into great team. Really no crazy recommendations we would make to this. We think it's overall put together very well.
All right, last but certainly not least, we have Wolf. We has Iron Valiant, the Dunsparce, Raichu, Ogerpon Heartflame, Golurk, Weezing, Kleavor, Umbreon, Hisuian Braviary, Duraludon, and Blastoise.
This team has a really rough Fairy Dragon Steel core. I drafted Arcaludon personally, but let it go because I don't think it does the best job at filling either of those types. I think you would either need another Steel type or another Dragon type to back it up because it lacks a resistance to Fairy, which really makes it struggle quite a bit more than you would imagine, especially with its low special defense. Iron Valiant's great as a Fairy type. I don't think you necessarily need a defensive fairy type, but I do think it makes it a little bit more difficult to switch into dragon moves, especially since your steel type is not resistant to dragon moves either.
Yeah, absolutely. And then yeah, your speed tier is also pretty stagnant as well.
Yeah, you got 3 over 110, 2 of them being at 110, and then there's a huge drop off to 85, and it kind of repeats a lot from there. 85, 85, 78, 65, 65. So I think this team could use a little bit more diversity to not allow the opponents to be able to run adamant or modest natures.
Okay, another thing I just noticed, Blastoise being Terra Ice is an interesting decision. I can see the vision, but
offensively, I think it's fine, but Ice is just such a worse defensive typing than Water is, and I don't think the team lacking an Ice type was really something that should have been a worry per se.
Yeah, decent Ice type is nice to have, but yeah, it's by no means a necessity.
Absolutely. There's good hazard removal as well as setters on this team, and the team overall has a ton of support options, but I think it lacks a little bit of that offensive power outside of Iron Valiant and Ogerpon.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to put this team in revisions recommended. There's just a few things that we think this team could be better with. I think a better dragon or a better steel type is one of the biggest things, and just maybe a bit better of not necessarily a wall breaker, but maybe like a sweeper. I don't know. It's a weird thing because Ogerpon can do both a wall breaker and sweep. Same thing with Iron Valiant, but I think just outside of those two, it's lacking that strong offense, because if something walls both of those, you're kind of in a rough situation. So this is our rankings for the Shaymin division for VDL Season 3. Like I said at the start, please do not take offense to this at all. This is just us trying to help out, give a little bit of constructive criticism on what we think your teams are lacking or what they're doing good, what you could do better. If you have any questions or concerns, just message us. This is just open discussion, us just having a good time. But if you enjoy, please drop a like, subscribe, and I wish everyone the best of luck for Season 3 in the Shaymin division. Peace.